In August 1944, a supply ledger at a prisoner-of-war camp in Iowa recorded a routine entry, "Frozen dairy product, issued at evening meal." The line included a quantity, a date, and the signature of a quartermaster officer. On the same day, a separate canteen log noted the receipt of chilled bottled beverages, counted by crate and returned empties. Both entries were filed without annotation. The camp held German soldiers captured in Normandy weeks earlier. Their transfer numbers were entered into rosters. Medical inspections were completed. Barracks assignments were posted. Work details were scheduled. Meal times were fixed by written order. Nothing in the administrative files distinguished that evening from others. At dusk, prisoners moved through the mess hall information. Trays were issued. Portions were served according to the posted menu. Guards remained at assigned posts. Lighting was operational. On the tables stood glass bottles with English-language labels. From metal containers, frozen portions were issued in measured scoops. The following morning began with roll call. From the summer of 1943 onward, increasing numbers of German military personnel captured in North Africa, Italy, and later in Western Europe were transported across the Atlantic to the continental United States under procedures established by the War Department and the Provost Marshal General's Office. Transport records from the ports of embarkation at Oran, Casablanca, Naples, and later Le Havre document the transfer of prisoners in accordance with existing regulations governing enemy personnel. Upon arrival at ports such as Norfolk, Newport News, New York, and New Orleans, the prisoners were registered, medically inspected, and reassigned to inland transport. Rail movements carried them to a network of prisoner-of-war camps distributed across the United States, including installations in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, the Carolinas, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, and Maine. Camp construction reports indicate that many facilities had originally been designed as training bases for U.S. Army units. Barracks, mess halls, administrative buildings, guard towers, and perimeter fencing were already in place or completed under accelerated construction schedules. The camps were administered by U.S. Army personnel, often drawn from service units or older age categories. Guard detachments maintained custody under standing orders. Daily routines were governed by written regulations posted in camp offices and mess areas. Roll calls, work details, medical inspections, and meal schedules followed established patterns. Food service operations within the camps were supervised by quartermaster officers. Ration scales for prisoners of war were determined by directives referencing the Geneva Convention relative to the treatment of prisoners of war of 1929. Documentation from the Office of the Quartermaster General specifies that prisoners were to receive rations equivalent in quantity and quality to those issued to U.S. Army troops stationed at base camps. Menu planning documents preserved in camp records show the inclusion of bread, meat, vegetables, potatoes, cereals, coffee, sugar, and dairy products. Food procurement was handled through military supply channels and local contracts. Ice cream appears in quartermaster requisition forms beginning in late 1943 for several camps located near dairy production centers. In states such as Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and upstate New York, dairy surplus contracts enabled the regular provision of milk, butter, and frozen dairy products. Refrigeration equipment inventories list the installation of walk-in coolers and ice cream freezers in camp mess halls. Technical manuals describe the operation and maintenance of this equipment by enlisted personnel assigned to food service duties. Coca-Cola distribution within the United States was supported by bottling plants operating under civilian contracts. Records from the Coca-Cola Company and War Production Board allocations indicate that bottled soft drinks were produced in large quantities for domestic consumption, including military installations. Camp commissary reports show that Coca-Cola was supplied to prisoner-of-war camps through the same distribution networks used for U.S. Army posts. Bottles were delivered in wooden crates and stored in refrigerated facilities or ice-cooled containers. Initial encounters with these food items are recorded in camp intelligence summaries, interrogation reports, and personal letters intercepted under censorship procedures. Military intelligence officers assigned to prisoner-of-war camps prepared periodic reports on morale, discipline, and attitudes observed among the prisoners. These reports were forwarded through command channels to regional headquarters. In several instances, officers noted that prisoners reacted visibly upon encountering ice cream during meals served in the mess halls. Observations included pauses in eating, examination of the food, and verbal exchanges among prisoners, though these exchanges were not transcribed verbatim in official documents. Similarly, intelligence summaries reference the distribution of bottled Coca-Cola during certain meals or as part of authorized purchases through camp canteens. The canteen system permitted prisoners to spend earned wages or allocated credits on approved items. Price lists posted in canteen buildings included soft drinks among available goods. Guards and administrative staff monitored transactions and inventory. Reports note instances in which prisoners examined the bottles, labels, and caps before consumption. German prisoners arrived with varying expectations shaped by their experiences in European theaters. Transport manifests and capture reports indicate that many had endured extended periods of field rations, reduced supply lines, and restricted access to fresh food. Upon arrival at U.S. camps, medical inspection reports document weight loss and nutritional deficiencies among some prisoners. Camp medical officers implemented standard dietary provisions without differentiation among nationalities. Camp commandants were instructed to maintain compliance with international law. Circulars from the Provost Marshal General emphasized that treatment standards were to be uniform and documented. Inspecting officers from the International Committee of the Red Cross visited camps at scheduled intervals. Their reports include descriptions of food quality and quantity, noting the availability of dairy products and beverages. Ice cream is mentioned in several inspection summaries as having been observed during meals or special distributions. In Texas camps, particularly those located near urban centers with established cold storage facilities, ice cream deliveries were recorded during summer months. Temperature logs maintained by quartermaster personnel show that frozen products were stored and served within prescribed ranges. Mess sergeants kept daily meal records, listing items served. These records include entries for ice cream on specific dates. The presence of Coca-Cola is documented in similar fashion. Bottling plant delivery receipts indicate quantities shipped to military installations. Camp inventory logs track receipt and distribution. In some camps, Coca-Cola was served with meals, in others, it was sold through the canteen. Camp regulations limited consumption to prevent disorder and required empty bottles to be returned for reuse. Intelligence officers noted that some prisoners compared these provisions to their expectations based on prior information. Reports reference statements made during monitored conversations, indicating uncertainty regarding the origin or authenticity of the food items. Prisoners were observed discussing whether the ice cream was a special issue or a temporary measure. Coca-Cola bottles were examined for markings, and some prisoners were seen reading labels repeatedly. Work details assigned to prisoners included agricultural labor, forestry, road maintenance, and food processing. In camps where prisoners worked on farms or in food plants, they encountered American civilian food distribution systems. Reports from camp labor officers indicate that prisoners returning from work details sometimes commented on the availability of food products in civilian settings. These comments were summarized in intelligence reports without attribution. Mail censorship units reviewed incoming and outgoing correspondence. Letters written by prisoners to families in Germany sometimes included references to camp food. Translations attached to censorship files note descriptions of meals that included dairy products and bottled beverages. These descriptions were factual and brief. Censors marked letters according to standard procedures and forwarded copies of translations to intelligence sections. The camp environment included structured routines intended to maintain order. Meals were served at fixed times. Prisoners entered mess halls in groups, collected trays, and received portions from serving personnel. Ice cream, when served, was portioned using standard scoops. Coca-Cola bottles were opened by the prisoners themselves or by designated orderlies, depending on camp rules. Camp newspapers, produced under supervision, occasionally listed menu items for the week. These publications were reviewed by camp authorities prior to distribution. In several issues preserved in archives, ice cream appears in menu listings. Coca-Cola is listed among canteen offerings. German non-commissioned officers retained internal disciplinary roles under U.S. oversight. They organized barracks and reported infractions. Camp reports indicate that these internal structures extended to meal organization, with designated prisoners responsible for maintaining order in mess halls. Observations from guards note that during initial distributions of unfamiliar food items, attention levels increased and movement slowed as prisoners focused on the items received. Training manuals for guards included instructions on interaction with prisoners. Guards were advised to maintain professional distance and avoid discussions of political or strategic matters. Reports from guard units note that questions regarding food supply were common during early weeks of camp operation. Guards recorded these interactions in daily logs without elaboration. Medical officers monitored digestive issues and allergies. Medical logs show occasional reports of stomach discomfort following consumption of dairy products by prisoners unaccustomed to them. These cases were treated according to standard medical protocols. No changes to ration scales are noted in response. Coca-Cola consumption was monitored due to caffeine content. Medical memoranda addressed allowable quantities and timing. No deviations from standard practice are recorded in the documents examined. Red Cross parcels supplemented camp rations in some instances. Inventory records list items received, including chocolate, powdered milk, and canned goods. Ice cream and Coca-Cola were not included in Red Cross parcels and were supplied exclusively through U.S. channels. In camps located in colder climates, ice cream distribution continued during winter months, as refrigeration facilities maintained storage conditions. Reports note that frozen ground conditions did not affect supply delivery. Mess hall heating systems ensured indoor service. German prisoners transferred between camps carried prior experiences with them. Transfer records and intake interviews note prior camp locations. Intelligence officers observed that prisoners who had previously been held in camps without frozen dairy products reacted differently upon encountering ice cream at new locations. These observations were recorded descriptively. Canteen price controls were enforced uniformly. Price lists from multiple camps show Coca-Cola priced identically to that at U.S. military posts. Wage rates for prisoner labor were credited to individual accounts. Accounting ledgers document purchases made, including soft drinks. Disciplinary reports include isolated incidents involving misuse of bottles or improper disposal. These incidents were handled through established disciplinary channels. No broader disruptions are recorded in connection with food distribution. Weather reports attached to camp logs provide context for seasonal variations. Summer heat is noted in several logs, coinciding with increased ice cream distribution. Supply officers adjusted delivery schedules accordingly. Photographic records from Signal Corps units include images of camp facilities and daily activities. Some photographs show mess hall interiors with serving lines and food items, including ice cream containers and beverage crates. These photographs are labeled with dates and locations. Training films produced for military instruction occasionally include footage of prisoner-of-war camps. In some reels, scenes depict meal service. These materials were used internally and archived. Administrative correspondence between camp commandants and regional headquarters includes references to supply efficiency and compliance with directives. Ice cream and Coca-Cola are mentioned only in logistical contexts. German prisoners were subject to ideological screening. Intelligence units monitored conversations and materials. Food-related discussions were noted only insofar as they related to morale or compliance. As the number of prisoners increased following operations in France in mid-1944, camp populations expanded. Additional facilities were opened. Supply chains adjusted to increased demand. Procurement records show proportional increases in dairy and beverage deliveries. Transportation of perishable goods was coordinated with civilian suppliers. Refrigerated rail cars and trucks were allocated under priority systems. Delivery schedules were documented. By late 1944, ice cream and Coca-Cola had become regular items in many camps. Camp records treat their presence as routine. Intelligence reports mention them less frequently, focusing instead on labor output and security. Throughout this period, all observations and records were compiled contemporaneously. Reports were dated and filed. No retrospective annotations appear in the primary documents reviewed for this account. As camp operations expanded during late 1943 and throughout 1944, administrative procedures governing prisoner-of-war facilities became increasingly standardized. Directives issued by the Provost Marshal General specified uniform reporting formats for food service, labor utilization, medical care, and security. Camp commandants submitted monthly summaries detailing population numbers, supply status, and notable observations. These documents were compiled at Service Command Headquarters and reviewed without commentary. Within these summaries, references to food items such as ice cream and bottled soft drinks appeared intermittently, recorded as logistical data rather than exceptional occurrences. German prisoners arriving from newly opened fronts in Western Europe during the latter half of 1944 were processed through reception stations before assignment to permanent camps. Intake records document the confiscation of personal items, issuance of identification tags, and orientation briefings conducted through interpreters. Prisoners were informed of camp rules, work obligations, and available facilities. Orientation materials included explanations of the mess system and canteen operations. Printed notices in German outlined meal schedules and listed items available for purchase, including beverages supplied through camp stores. Quartermaster supply officers coordinated deliveries based on projected consumption rates. Ration planning tables calculated caloric requirements per prisoner per day. Ice cream was categorized as a dairy item and included within allowable substitutions under ration guidelines. Procurement contracts with regional dairy specified quantities, packaging, and delivery intervals. These contracts were filed with camp supply offices and inspected during audits. Coca-Cola bottling plants operated under civilian management but were subject to wartime regulations governing sugar allocation and bottle reuse. Distribution records show that military installations received priority allocations for domestic morale purposes. Prisoner-of-war camps were included in these allocations as subordinate installations. Bottles delivered to camps were identical to those sold in civilian markets, bearing standard labels and embossed markings. Camp inventory procedures required accounting for empty bottles, which were returned to distributors. Intelligence officers assigned to camps continued to monitor prisoner attitudes through observation and review of censored correspondence. Weekly intelligence summaries compiled by Camp G2 sections included sections on food, work, and discipline. In several summaries, officers noted that prisoners discussed the regularity of certain food items. These notes were factual and lacked interpretation. References to ice cream and Coca-Cola were included alongside mentions of bread quality or meat portions. Prisoners assigned to kitchen duties provided labor under supervision. Work rosters list German personnel assigned as cooks, bakers, dishwashers, and mess orderlies. These prisoners handled food preparation using ingredients supplied by the quartermaster. Training manuals for prisoner kitchen labor specified sanitation standards and preparation methods. Ice cream was generally received pre-frozen and required minimal handling beyond portioning and service. Mess hall procedures were governed by written standing operating procedures. Prisoners entered information, collected utensils, and proceeded along serving lines. Guards observed from designated positions. Serving personnel dispensed food according to portion charts. Ice cream, when served, was issued at the end of the line. Bottled beverages were either placed on tables prior to seating or issued individually, depending on camp practice. In camps where prisoners worked outside the perimeter on approved labor details, packed meals were sometimes provided. These meals typically consisted of sandwiches, fruit, and beverages. Coca-Cola appears in some packed meal inventories. Ice cream was not included in packed meals due to storage limitations. Medical inspection reports continued to monitor nutritional status. Periodic weigh-ins recorded average weight changes among prisoners. Reports show stabilization or gradual increases in weight over time. No separate category was maintained for dairy consumption effects. Instances of lactose intolerance were treated individually. International Committee of the Red Cross inspections occurred at intervals documented in camp logs. Inspectors toured facilities, observed meal service, and reviewed ration scales. Their reports include descriptions of food variety. In some reports, inspectors noted the presence of frozen desserts and bottled soft drinks. These observations were recorded without comment beyond verification of compliance. German senior prisoners, recognized as camp spokesmen, submitted written requests through established channels. Some requests concerned food preparation methods or scheduling. Records do not show formal complaints regarding ice cream or Coca-Cola availability. Requests were logged and answered administratively. Winter conditions in northern camps required adjustments to supply logistics. Snow and ice affected transportation schedules. Quartermaster correspondence details contingency plans for maintaining deliveries. Refrigeration units were inspected regularly. Maintenance logs show repairs performed on freezers and coolers to prevent spoilage. Training bulletins for guards addressed cultural differences and prohibited fraternization. Guards were instructed to answer procedural questions but avoid personal discussion. Daily guard logs occasionally note questions from prisoners regarding food origins or preparation. These entries are brief and factual. Camp newspapers continued publication under supervision. Articles included announcements, work assignments, and notices of recreational activities. Menu listings appeared periodically. These publications were archived by camp administrative offices. Recreational programs included sports, music, and educational classes. Food-related events were limited to scheduled meals. Special meals for holidays were authorized by command directives. Thanksgiving and Christmas menus in several camps included ice cream as a dessert. Coca-Cola distribution during these meals is recorded in mess logs. Accounting offices maintained individual prisoner accounts. Wage credits for labor were posted monthly. Canteen purchase records show steady consumption of soft drinks. Statistical summaries compiled at regional level aggregated sales figures. Security reports document occasional contraband incidents. Items seized included unauthorized food storage in barracks. Ice cream was not found in such incidents due to storage constraints. Empty bottles were sometimes retained beyond permitted limits and confiscated. As camps reached full capacity, overcrowding concerns were addressed through transfers. Transfer orders included instructions for medical clearance and property accounting. Prisoners transferred between camps experienced differing supply arrangements. Intake interviews at receiving camps sometimes noted prior experiences, recorded neutrally. Supply inspections by higher headquarters evaluated efficiency and compliance. Inspection reports list quantities of perishable goods on hand. Ice cream stocks were inspected for spoilage. Coca-Cola inventories were checked against receipts. Training films and photographs continued to document camp life. Visual records show standardization of facilities and procedures. Food service scenes appear consistent across locations. German prisoners employed in agricultural labor encountered American food production. Reports from labor officers note that prisoners working in dairy farms observed milk processing. These observations were recorded as part of labor activity summaries. Mail censorship continued throughout the period. Letters mentioning food were translated and filed. Some letters referenced regular access to dairy products and bottled beverages. These translations were forwarded without annotation. By early 1945, administrative correspondence reflects routine operations. Supply issues focused on transportation and allocation rather than novelty. Ice cream and Coca-Cola appear in records as established items. Weather reports indicate severe cold in some regions during winter 1944 to 1945. Despite conditions, food service continued uninterrupted. Heating fuel allocations were monitored. Camp closures and consolidations began as prisoner numbers fluctuated. Deactivation plans included disposition of equipment and supplies. Refrigeration units were inventoried. Remaining food stocks were redistributed. Throughout this period, documentation remained contemporaneous. Reports were dated and filed sequentially. Observations regarding food items were integrated into broader operational records without emphasis. During the first months of 1945, prisoner-of-war camps within the continental United States operated under standing directives that remained unchanged in structure and language. Administrative memoranda circulated between service commands addressed routine matters of supply, labor allocation, and personnel rotation. Camp population reports recorded fluctuations as prisoners were transferred, consolidated, or prepared for repatriation staging areas. Food service records continued to be compiled daily, listing quantities issued, consumed, and remaining in storage. Quartermaster Depot correspondence shows that dairy procurement remained consistent despite seasonal constraints. Cold weather reduced certain civilian distribution routes, but priority transport allocations ensured continued delivery to military installations. Rail shipment manifests list refrigerated cars assigned to dairy products destined for camps in the Midwest and Northeast. In southern and southwestern regions, truck deliveries from local dairies were documented. Ice cream production schedules were adjusted to meet contracted volumes. Packaging specifications required standardized containers compatible with camp freezer units. Maintenance logs from camp engineering sections record inspections of refrigeration equipment. Freezer motors, insulation, and electrical connections were checked according to preventive maintenance schedules. Repairs were documented with dates, parts replaced, and labor hours expended. These logs were reviewed during inspections by higher headquarters. Coca-Cola deliveries followed established civilian distribution patterns. Bottling plants submitted invoices indicating quantities delivered, bottle counts, and crate returns. Camp supply clerks verified receipts and updated inventory ledgers. Empty bottle return schedules were coordinated to prevent shortages. In some camps, temporary shortages occurred due to transportation delays. These were recorded in daily supply status reports and resolved through subsequent deliveries. Intelligence summaries prepared during this period continued to include brief notes on prisoner conversations overheard in common areas. Officers reported that discussions among prisoners regarding food availability occurred less frequently as routine stabilized. When noted, such discussions were summarized in neutral terms. No changes to intelligence collection methods are recorded. Medical department records include continued monitoring of dietary effects. Annual physical examinations conducted in early 1945 recorded general health indicators. Reports note stable conditions across camp populations. Dietary supplements were not modified. Ice cream consumption is mentioned only in relation to caloric intake calculations. Work program reports show sustained use of prisoner labor in agriculture and industry. In dairy-producing regions, prisoners assigned to farm labor assisted with milking and feed preparation under civilian supervision. Labor officers compiled weekly summaries detailing hours worked and tasks performed. These summaries occasionally note exposure to civilian food processing environments. Mess hall staffing rosters list both U.S. personnel and prisoner workers. Training sessions for kitchen laborers were documented, covering sanitation, portion control, and equipment use. Manuals referenced standard Army food service procedures. Ice cream handling instructions emphasize temperature control and timely service. Camp discipline logs record infractions unrelated to food service. Instances involving mess halls typically concern seating order or unauthorized entry times. No disciplinary action specific to ice cream or beverage distribution are recorded beyond routine bottle return enforcement. Red Cross liaison correspondence continued. Inspectors scheduled visits and submitted reports. These reports include inventory lists of food items observed. Ice cream and bottled beverages are noted in several inspections conducted between January and March 1945. Inspectors verified compliance with ration standards and recorded observations. Camp educational programs expanded during this period. Classes were held in designated buildings. Schedules did not conflict with meal times. Notices posted in barracks reiterated meal schedules and canteen hours. Canteen operations remained regulated. Monthly sales reports list items sold and revenue collected. Coca-Cola sales figures appear consistently. Price controls were enforced. Audits verified accounting accuracy. Mail censorship volumes increased as prisoners wrote more frequently. Translation teams processed letters according to established priorities. Food references were marked but not restricted unless violating censorship rules. Copies of translations were filed. Photographic documentation continued sporadically. Signal Corps photographers captured images of camp infrastructure and activities. Some images include food service scenes with visible dairy containers and beverage crates. Captions identify dates and locations. Guard unit reports emphasize routine security. Training refreshers were conducted. Guards rotated shifts. Logs include notes on weather, roll calls, and work detail movements. Food service is mentioned only in scheduling contexts. As spring approached, agricultural labor increased. Camps coordinated with local authorities to deploy prisoner labor to planting operations. Packed lunches were prepared for work details. Beverage allocations for these lunches were recorded. Ice cream was not included due to transport constraints. Administrative planning documents from early 1945 address potential reductions in camp populations. Scenarios included consolidation of facilities. Supply officers prepared inventories of equipment and consumables. Ice cream freezers and beverage storage units were listed among assets. Transportation units documented rail and truck movements related to camp operations. Fuel allocations were monitored. No disruptions to food deliveries are recorded in the available logs. Camp libraries expanded holdings. Reading rooms were maintained. No food consumption was permitted in these areas, as noted in posted rules. Religious services were conducted according to schedules. Special meals associated with religious observances were authorized when requested. Menus for these meals were filed. Ice cream appears in some menus as a dessert item. By mid-1945, administrative correspondence reflects preparation for changes in prisoner status. Repatriation planning documents outline procedures for eventual transfers. Food service planning continued on a daily basis without modification pending further orders. Throughout this phase, all records maintain contemporaneous language. Entries are factual, dated, and filed. Ice cream and Coca-Cola remain present in documentation as routine supply items within the broader operational framework of prisoner of war camp administration. From late spring into summer 1945, camp administrative sections continued to compile daily and weekly reports according to established formats. Morning reports listed prisoner strength by compound, hospital census, and work assignments. Quartermaster sections submitted ration returns showing issues by category, including bread, meat, vegetables, fats, sugar, coffee, and dairy. Warehousing logs recorded receipts, storage conditions, and spoilage inspections. Camp commandants issued routine memoranda on sanitation, fire prevention, and compliance with posted schedules. Food service operations remained governed by standard Army procedures. Mess sergeants maintained meal rosters, portion control tables, and equipment checklists. The mess halls operated in shifts where camp population exceeded seating capacity. Prisoners moved from barracks to mess by compound order, under guard observation. Serving lines were staffed by a combination of U.S. personnel and designated prisoner workers. Daily menus were posted in German and English in approved formats. Menu entries were recorded without embellishment, listing staple items and substitutions authorized under ration directives. Dairy deliveries were documented in receiving logs signed by supply clerks. In regions served by nearby dairies, milk deliveries arrived early morning and were transferred to cold storage. Where rail shipments were used, freight manifests and depot-issue documents were attached to monthly supply files. Ice cream continued to be received as a packaged product. The containers were inspected for integrity, placed in freezer storage, and issued to mess halls on days when it appeared on menus. Equipment logs continued to show scheduled maintenance on refrigeration units, with recorded inspections of thermostats, door seals, and electrical connections. Reports of freezer malfunction were routed through the camp engineering section and resolved through repair or replacement of components. Service records show that repairs were logged with date, nature of malfunction, corrective action, and parts drawn from supply. Bottled beverage procurement remained within the camp store and quartermaster account system. Coca-Cola shipments arrived in wooden crates and were checked against invoices and requisitions. Storage was conducted in cool rooms, ice-cooled lockers, or shaded areas depending on available facilities. Inventory control required count verification at receipt, issue, and return of empties. Empty bottle returns were logged by quantity. Where local bottlers required crate exchange, crate counts were reconciled. When delivery schedules were delayed due to transportation constraints, camp store managers recorded temporary shortages and adjusted sale limits per prisoner in order to match available stock. These adjustments were posted in the canteen in German and English. Canteen operations continued under established rules. Prisoner accounts were maintained by camp finance sections, showing wages credited for labor performed and debits for authorized purchases. Ledger entries recorded dates, amounts, and item categories. Monthly summaries aggregated sales volumes and were transmitted to higher headquarters. Coca-Cola sales appeared in these summaries with quantity counts and total revenue. In some camps, bottled drinks were issued at meals on specific days. In such cases, the mess logs recorded the distribution, and bottle return procedures were enforced through designated collection points at mess exits. Prisoner labor details expanded seasonally in agricultural regions. Camp labor officers coordinated with local employers under approved arrangements. Work agreements specified hours, pay rates, transportation, guard requirements, and supervisory responsibilities. Daily work reports recorded the number of prisoners dispatched, destination, tasks performed, and hours worked. In dairy areas, prisoners were assigned to tasks such as barn cleaning, feed handling, field work, and milking operations under civilian oversight. Labor officers compiled weekly summaries and included notes on transportation schedules, weather impacts, and any injuries or illnesses reported during labor. These notes were entered in standard formats and forwarded through command channels. Transportation to external work sites followed scheduled convoy procedures. Trucks or buses departed camp at set times, with guards assigned to each vehicle according to regulations. Muster lists were prepared before departure and checked upon return. Packed meals were prepared for work details when required. Quartermaster packing lists for these meals included standard items such as sandwiches, fruit, and beverages when available. Beverage distribution for work meals was recorded in supply issue forms. Ice cream did not appear in packed meal lists due to storage and transport limitations and remained associated with mess hall service or authorized special meals. Medical services continued routine operations. Daily sick call logs recorded visits, diagnoses, and treatments. Periodic health inspections were conducted in barracks and work areas. Medical officers recorded sanitation observations, including kitchen cleanliness and water supply checks. Reports on nutrition remain tied to ration scales and general health indicators. When digestive complaints were recorded following dairy consumption, cases were entered individually without changes to overall ration practices. Isolation procedures and hospital admissions followed standard Army medical protocols. Hospital kitchen operations kept separate ration accounting forms for patients. Security sections maintained routine guard operations. Guard mount reports recorded assignments, posts, and shift schedules. Tower logs noted weather, visibility, and patrol activity. Perimeter inspections were documented. Access to mess halls and canteens was controlled by posted schedules and compound movement orders. Guards recorded any irregularities in daily logs, including late arrivals, unauthorized movement, or failure to comply with bottle return requirements. Infractions were processed through disciplinary procedures. Disciplinary records list the nature of offense, date, witnesses, and penalties imposed under camp regulations. Where offenses involved misuse of canteen items, entries described the specific item and circumstances in brief terms. Camp intelligence sections continued observation and reporting under established directives. Reports were prepared weekly or as required, summarizing morale indicators, discipline issues, and noteworthy rumors. Intelligence officers relied on guard reports, censored mail summaries, and monitored conversations in common areas. Food-related references appeared primarily in mail translations and incidental observations. Censors processed outgoing and incoming mail under wartime censorship standards. Letters mentioning food were translated and filed in accordance with established procedures. Translations included descriptions of meals, canteen offerings, and supply regularity. These translations were forwarded to camp intelligence sections as part of routine information flow. Where letters included prohibited content, censors applied standard redactions or withheld the correspondence per directive. International Committee of the Red Cross visits continued at intervals. Inspection reports recorded facility conditions, prisoner accommodation, medical services, and rations. Inspectors observed meal service and reviewed ration records. Reports include itemized notes on food quality and variety. Where ice cream was served during inspections, it was recorded as observed. Where bottled soft drinks were sold or issued, it was recorded as part of canteen or mess observations. The reports were filed and forwarded through established channels. Camp administrative offices continued to prepare consolidated status reports. These reports included personnel strength, supply status, labor utilization, and incident summaries. Quartermaster sections attached ration returns and inventory summaries. Canteen officers attached sales reports. Engineering sections attached maintenance summaries. Medical sections attached hospital census and sanitation reports. These documents were dated and filed sequentially. References to ice cream and Coca-Cola appeared in supply entries, sales reports, and occasional inspection notes, recorded as items handled within standard logistical procedures. Special meals were authorized on defined occasions under command directives. Menu sheets for authorized holiday meals were filed. During late spring and summer 1945, some camps recorded special meals connected to religious observances or administrative events such as inspections and official visits. When special meals were served, additional items such as desserts or bottled beverages were included where allowed by supply. Ice cream appears on several special meal menus and in mess logs as a dessert issue. Coca-Cola appears in special meal records either as a canteen item made available in increased quantity or as a beverage issued with the meal. These distributions were recorded in standard issue forms. Camp newspapers remained under supervision and continued publication in some installations. Editorial control procedures required review by camp authorities prior to distribution. Issues contained notices of schedules, rules, educational offerings, and sports events. Menu information was sometimes included. Where listed, ice cream appeared as a menu item without emphasis. Canteen announcements listed available goods, including beverages, when stocks permitted. These publications were archived in camp files. Prisoners continued participation in educational programs, vocational instruction, and organized recreation. Schedules were coordinated to avoid conflict with work and meal times. Barracks orderlies maintained cleanliness per posted standards. Inspections of barracks and latrines were conducted and documented. Sanitation reports noted compliance or deficiencies and recorded corrective actions. Food storage in barracks remained prohibited, and inspections occasionally recorded confiscation of perishable items. Such confiscations were logged and disposed of according to sanitation procedures. As the European theater concluded in May 1945, administrative communications referencing changes in prisoner status increased. Orders from higher headquarters addressed custody, security, and planning considerations. Camps were instructed to maintain routine discipline and continue required labor programs under existing agreements unless otherwise directed. Camp populations were adjusted through transfers and consolidations. Transfer orders specified reporting dates, transportation arrangements, and property accounting. Intake procedures at receiving camps remained consistent, including medical checks, assignment of quarters, and orientation briefings. Prisoners arriving from other installations sometimes brought established purchasing practices and expectations regarding canteen stock. Canteen officers recorded demand patterns in monthly reports and adjusted ordering within allowed limits. Supply chain correspondence shows continued monitoring of ration components. Some reports note regional shortages of certain items due to civilian demand and transport constraints. Substitutions authorized under ration directives were applied and recorded. Dairy supply remained generally stable in regions with strong production, and ice cream distribution continued where contracts and refrigeration capacity supported it. In other regions, ice cream distribution appeared less frequently in menus, consistent with local procurement and storage capability. Coca-Cola availability varied with bottling plant production and transport schedules, but camp stores continued to list it among standard offerings when delivered. Where unavailable, canteen postings indicated temporary substitution with other permitted beverages or reduced purchase limits. Administrative inspections by service commands continued. Inspection teams reviewed records, observed facilities, and issued written findings. Findings addressed security compliance, sanitation, record-keeping, and supply management. Where food service was reviewed, inspectors verified ration accounting and storage conditions. Observations regarding ice cream focused on freezer maintenance and spoilage prevention. Observations regarding Coca-Cola focused on inventory control and bottle return procedures. Inspection reports were filed and routed through command channels. Throughout this period, daily camp life continued in scheduled cycles. Roll calls, work dispatch, meal service, sick call, and evening counts were recorded in logs. The presence of ice cream and Coca-Cola in camp records remained tied to procurement, storage, issue, and accounting. Their appearance in prisoner correspondence and monitored summaries continued in the same factual manner as other ration items, without emphasis beyond recording what was issued, purchased, or observed under standard operating procedures. In late summer and autumn 1945, prisoner-of-war camps in the continental United States remained under custody procedures issued through War Department channels and implemented by service commands. Camp rosters and strength returns reflect continued custody of German personnel, while administrative planning documents addressed consolidation, deactivation of selected facilities, and preparation for transfer to embarkation staging areas. Orders transmitted to camp commandants directed continued compliance with standing regulations governing rations, sanitation, labor, medical care, and discipline. Daily operations continued on posted schedules, with roll calls, work dispatch, meal service, sick call, and evening counts recorded in unit logs. Camp administrative sections compiled routine correspondence regarding transfers. Movement orders specified dates, rail routing, guard requirements, and accounting for prisoner property. Prior to movement, prisoners were medically screened, issued travel rations, and instructed on transport procedures. Travel ration lists generally included standard non-perishable items. Bottled beverages were not listed as standard travel rations, and frozen dairy items were not included due to transport limitations. Quartermaster sections prepared the travel ration issues with documented quantities and maintained receipt signatures by responsible personnel. As consolidation progressed, camps receiving transfers updated intake procedures. Intake forms recorded identification, prior camp assignment, medical status, and allocation of quarters. Orientation materials were reissued where required. Camp commandants continued to post rules in German and English. Canteen hours, meal schedules, and work detail procedures were maintained as reported in daily administrative logs. Any changes resulting from consolidation were posted in memoranda and preserved in camp files. Quartermaster records show continued ration accounting through the remainder of 1945. Monthly ration returns were filed with Service Command Headquarters. These returns list quantities issued and on hand by category. Dairy entries continued to appear in these returns. Ice cream, when present, appeared as an issued item drawn from frozen storage and accounted for by container count and estimated portion totals. Where camps reduced operations ahead of deactivation, supply officers curtailed procurement of perishable items to avoid waste, and these adjustments were recorded in correspondence and inventory drawdown plans. Engineering and maintenance sections prepared property inventories in anticipation of deactivation. Refrigeration equipment was listed with serial numbers and condition reports. Some units were reassigned to other installations, others were designated for transfer to surplus property channels. Maintenance logs document final inspections and shutdown procedures. In facilities slated for closure, freezer and cooler use declined as food stocks were reduced and redistributed. Redistribution documentation shows that perishable goods were transferred to nearby installations or consumed according to planned drawdown schedules. Coca-Cola procurement continued through existing channels where camp stores and mess operations remained active. Canteen inventory reports and invoices show continuing deliveries in many locations through late 1945, subject to regional distribution schedules. Bottle return procedures remained in effect. Camp store managers recorded crate and bottle counts, returned empties to distributors, and reconciled inventory in monthly audits. Where camps prepared for closure, store stocks were reduced and remaining inventory was transferred, sold down under authorized limits, or returned to distributors where permitted by contract. These actions were recorded in property and inventory disposition files. Labor utilization reports show continued deployment of prisoner labor in agriculture and industry under approved arrangements during harvest seasons. Labor agreements were renewed or terminated according to local needs and camp status. Termination notices were filed where camps were consolidating and could no longer supply labor details. Transportation logs record daily movements to work sites, guard assignments, and return counts. Packed meal accounting remained in effect for work details. Beverage allocations for work meals depended on available canteen or quartermaster stock and were recorded in issue documents when provided. Medical services continued routine operations. Hospital census logs reflect ongoing treatment of routine illnesses and work-related injuries. Sanitation inspections continued in kitchens, barracks, and latrines, with findings recorded and corrective actions ordered when needed. Medical officers continued to certify prisoners for transfer when required. Final medical examinations were documented in preparation for movement. No changes to dietary directives are recorded in these examinations beyond routine notes on individual conditions. Security sections maintained standard guard operations. As camp populations declined in some locations, guard strength was adjusted, and post assignments were revised. Guard mount rosters reflect these changes. Perimeter patrol logs continued to record weather, visibility, and routine checks. Disciplinary procedures remained in effect. Disciplinary logs from late 1945 contain entries related to work detail compliance, barracks inspections, and canteen rule violations, including failure to return bottles or possession of unauthorized quantities of canteen goods. These entries were processed in the same administrative format as earlier records. Mail censorship continued under established rules. Censorship sections processed correspondence according to volume and staffing. Translations of letters referencing food and camp conditions continued to be prepared and filed. Some translations include descriptions of rations, desserts, and canteen goods. These descriptions remained factual, typically listing items available or served. As transfer activity increased, letters sometimes described preparation for movement, travel conditions, and receipt of standard travel rations. Food references in these letters were handled under routine censorship procedures. International Committee of the Red Cross inspections continued where camps remained active. Inspection reports compiled during 1945 include notes on camp population levels, living conditions, medical facilities, and rations. Food service observations remained itemized. Where ice cream or bottled soft drinks were present during inspections, the reports recorded their availability as observed. Where procurement had declined due to drawdown, inspection reports noted reduced variety consistent with inventories and ration substitutions, recorded without additional comment. Camp intelligence sections continued reporting where directed. Late 1945 intelligence summaries focused on discipline, internal prisoner organization, and compliance with labor and camp rules. Food-related references appear chiefly in the context of canteen demand or prisoner correspondence. Where prisoners discussed specific American food items, summaries recorded the occurrence without extended treatment. As camps consolidated, intelligence staffing and reporting frequency were adjusted and recorded in administrative correspondence. Camp newspapers and installations that continued publication carried routine notices regarding transfers, work schedules, and canteen hours. Menu listings appeared where editors maintained them under supervision. Where ice cream appeared on posted menus, it was listed as a dessert item without emphasis. Canteen availability notices listed beverages when stock permitted. These publications were archived with other camp administrative records. Transportation records show the movement of prisoners to ports of embarkation for return to Europe under post-hostilities arrangements. Rail movement orders specified train composition, guard detachments, and staging procedures. Upon departure from camps, property accountability forms recorded prisoner-issued clothing, equipment, and personal effects. Food provisions for transit were accounted for separately. Ice cream did not appear in transit provisioning records, consistent with storage constraints. Bottled soft drinks were not standard in transit provisioning and appear only in isolated inventory disposition entries where local conditions permitted sale or consumption prior to departure. At ports and staging areas, processing included roll calls, medical checks, and assignment to transport. Records from staging installations show continued use of standard Army rations. Commissary access for prisoners at staging areas varied by installation and was governed by local orders. Where canteen operations were maintained, beverage availability depended on local procurement and transport schedules and was documented in supply and sales records. Throughout late 1945, documentation remained centered on procedures, inventories, and scheduled activity. Ice cream and Coca-Cola continued to appear in camp records primarily in quartermaster and canteen files, requisitions, delivery receipts, storage logs, ration returns, menu sheets, sales reports, and bottle return records. Where prisoners referenced these items in censored correspondence, translations recorded their mention in the same administrative manner as references to other ration components. In facilities reducing operations, these items appeared in drawdown and disposition records, tied to freezer shutdown schedules and store inventory reduction. By the end of 1945, remaining active camps continued routine custody and reporting while transfer operations proceeded under movement orders. Daily logs maintained the same structure, recording counts, work details, meal service, and incidents. In the files generated during this period, the handling of ice cream and Coca-Cola is recorded through the same channels as other supply items, with entries dated signed, and filed as part of ongoing camp administration under the directives then in force.